Hi everyone, good evening. So, first of all, I would like to thank you all from the team of The Virtual Lawyer. Thank you for the response. Thank you for all the lovely messages. Thank you for reaching out whenever you have. We hope you enjoy everything that we try to put in front of you and all the sessions that we conduct for you. We would definitely request you to keep reaching out, keep telling us what you feel, what you like, what you didn't like. Apart from that, of course, keeping in mind the environment these days, I know it can be stressful. Apart from keeping, hi everyone, I can see you all waving. Hello. So apart from the fact that there is a virus which affects us physically and that we have to adhere to all the instructions and guidelines that we have been issued, we also need to take care about our mental health. I would strongly advise all of you to pay a little attention to your mental health, to the mental health of your relatives, of your near and dear ones. If there is anything, if you're feeling low, if you're feeling if negative thoughts are coming to your mind, you can always reach out to us. You can DM us. I will try to reply as soon as possible. And a little bit about myself. I am Janvi Sharma. I am an advocate. I am practicing, and this platform is started by my mother, Professor Dr. Manjula Batra, and I help her out as and when I can. So thank you all for supporting us, and now I would like to tell you about our speaker. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Bharat Chok. He became a judge at the age of 23. He cleared the Delhi Judicial Services exam and ranked first. He was a judge for about 4 years, and then he decided that he wants to come back to the bar and start practicing as an advocate. He is now a partner at Luthra and Luthra, which is a leading law firm in the country. He specializes in white-collar crimes, in arbitration, in cyber disputes, as well as commercial litigation. His interests and hobbies include football, writing, poetry, and teaching. So I guess Bharat will be coming in a little while. Hi Anirudh, hi Ketan, I can see you guys. Okay, I'm going to try and say hi to as many people as possible. Thank you all for joining in this evening. It really means a lot to all of us. Hi Simple Living 1993. Hi Bhavna. Hi Muskan. I'm just waiting for Bharat to join. Hi Sakshi. Hi, who is Shafi? Okay, that's an interesting Instagram handle. Mohit, Vaibhav, Chetna, hi. Akhil, hi. Debolina, hi. Okay, I see Bharat has sent me a request. I'm going to patch him through. Before I do, I hope you can hear me and see me clearly. I hope the video is not lagging. Please just indicate in the comments.
Hey, what's up?
All good. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Yes. So a lot of people have come and joined this video. We're getting a lot of comments today.
Mhm.
Gives most of it, but I'm replying to them anyway. Bharat, my first question to you is, what decides law and career, life path?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. And I'm really happy that you chose this platform and this way of doing it. I think frankly, all of us are kind of sick of, doing Zoom webinars and trust me, the next time somebody asks me to do a Zoom webinar, I'm going to stab that person. So thank you for doing it this way. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining in. I hope I'm audible and the video is fine.
Yes, we are getting comments.
Okay, sounds good. So why law? My dad's a lawyer, uh, and I've sort of grown up with the sights and sounds of law all around me. And when you grow up in a in a house which has a lawyer, you are looking at clients coming into your place, drafts being discussed, legal strategy being done, right when you're playing with your toys or studying with your books and stuff. So being a lawyer was something that came naturally. I saw my dad working at very close quarters, and I was really inspired by the way he practiced law, how passionate he was about law, and it came naturally. And I also had an instinct for it from the very start. Just to give you some illustration to possibly drive that point. I mean, as a young person too, I was really conscious of what justice is or injustice is. I distinctly remember at the age of 7 or something asking my dad to go fight somebody his own age, because I thought it was an unequal contest. He should go fight somebody who's 50 years, and when the fight is unequal, the outcome is going to be unequal as well. So I was, in short, a very very nasty and a difficult kid to my parents. I mean, if I had such a kid, I would not possibly raise my kid if my kid turns out to be like that. Totally obnoxious, and so very difficult child for my dad to raise. I being in that atmosphere, I knew that law is a very powerful weapon to correct a lot of things that are going wrong with the society. You can use law as an instrument to really ensure that you can do justice to people who really need you. Somebody who's in jail without a lawyer, somebody who has a house that is possessed by somebody else who cannot afford a lawyer, you can help them. Being a judge, you can help a lot of people, dispense real justice to them. So I was always inspired by that sort of a thing. And I mean, at the age of 6, I threatened my school principal that I'll sue you for defamation, because she, for the simple fact that she would not allow me to sit in a painting competition, because I was too young for that competition. And she very politely asked me to go, participate tomorrow because you are sort of young for this side. And I thought, as a 6-year-old, that I had a reputation to protect. And just because the principal has asked me to sort of not participate and go out, she's defamed me in front of my classmates. And at 6, I thought I had a reputation that I could protect in an action for defamation. So really nasty. My dad used to say, जब पैदा हुआ वकील तो शैतान ने ये कहा कि आज हम साहिब औलाद हो गए. So I was always that little shaitan in the house. So really difficult child. But law, was something I was passionate about. Then judging was something that I, became passionate about towards the 4th or 5th year of my law college, because I thought that this is a way to use your skill set as a lawyer, and I've always been passionate about law, to actually make a meaningful difference. Also had a public service dimension to it, wanted to sort of give back and use my knowledge of law to bring out a positive difference in people's lives. So yeah, that is how law happened. That is how judgeship happened, and it's great fun. I mean, the journey's been excellent. I'm in my 9th year of law, and have had the great opportunity of being a lawyer, a judge, a teacher, and all in such a short span of time. I consider myself really fortunate, and my mom loves to call me the jack of all trades. She thinks that I can't decide what I really want to be. If you want to be a judge, go take that call and stick to it. And so yeah, great fun. That's how law happened.
Yeah, so I totally understand what you mean by being born into law, because even I was born into law. Like, those were our living room discussions regarding law. So it just feels like a natural choice. Although I did not decide that I want to be a lawyer until much later in my life. Unlike you, 6 years of age, I had no idea that I was going to be a lawyer today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
you're doing well. So
well. We're both in this platform. We have such lovely comments. Talking about today. She is not a lawyer, but she's a big fan here anyway.
oh wow, thank you for joining. Thank you very much.
There is someone called Rajveer. He says, come to NUGS. Sir.
I would love to.
I'm sure not for a webinar though.
Sure.
So now we know that you secured the first your So could you four five tips of how to get how you
Okay. Janvi, your voice sort of broke in between, so I'm going to guess what you asked me. I think the question was a few tips on how to prepare for the exam and how to strategize. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Perfect. So I wish I had a formula that I could share which would work for everyone. The broad point is that you have to find out your own way of doing it, because there is no one straight jacket formula that works for everyone. We all have to find out our own way of doing it. But I can share what I did, which sort of worked for me, and I've had the opportunity of engaging with judges from across the country. So I try to share and summarize some of those points for our readers here. Uh, so number one is to be passionate about your law. I mean, that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Anyone wanting to be a serious litigator or a serious teacher or an in-house counsel or a lawyer, you have to be passionate about what you do, right? You really need to breathe, sleep, live the law that you practice. Uh, Mugging up the bare acts is not necessary, at least for an exam like Delhi. So number one question that you need to ask yourself is, what state are you looking at? Because we do not have an all India judicial service, so every state has its own pattern, has its own method of selecting judges. So some states insist a lot on the language of the bare act, learning the provisions by heart. You need to know every section, the subsection, and you need to just learn them by rote. There are some other states who do not insist that much on learning and remembering those provisions per se, but they really want you to understand law. For example, if you are reading res judicata in CPC, then it's okay if you do not know those subsections and you do not remember them by heart. But it's good for you to know what the concept is about. It's good for you to know what are the major areas or dimensions of the law of res judicata. For example, you need to know whether res judicata applies in a writ proceeding or not, whether it applies in a representative suit or not, what happens if you take up the argument of res judicata in an appeal, what is constructive res judicata. So you need to know at least those broad concepts. Some of those, some people are very intimidated by preparation, and they feel that I can't remember all of that law. I cannot learn those citations by heart. There are so many people who
think a
you have
lot of
heard of them.
a lot of questions regarding that. Mug
Okay,
up, learn.
sure. I would tell you that, in, for example, states like Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, and a couple of other states, uh, you do not need to learn all of this by rote. Okay, if you understand your law, if you have a conceptual understanding of these important concepts, and you have the ability to take a particular fact case and look at the evidence and then decide whether that concept applies or not. As long as you can do that, you are through. And but at the same time, you really need to know how the law has evolved. Number one, you really need to concentrate on the why of law. I always try to talk about this to my students and my younger colleagues at the chamber, that whenever you are reading a provision, it's very important for you to ask yourself the question as to why this provision came to be enacted the way it is enacted. For example, if you're reading 125 of the CRPC, which talks about maintenance to wife and children, you cannot decide a application under 125 of the CRPC for maintenance without getting into the why of this provision, the mischief that was sought to be taken care of by enactment. You need to write down in the exam that I'm aware as a judge that this provision has been enacted to protect women from starvation and destitution, and that is the social purpose behind the law. As a judge or as somebody who's writing the exam, you need to tell the examiner that I'm aware that this is a social context in which I have to look at the provision, and I know the parliamentary intent, I know the legislative intent, and when I apply the law, I would apply the law in that background and in that frame of mind. So as long as you are asking yourself this question, whenever you are reading any law, for example, there is a huge area in the Contract Act which is known as quasi contracts. So these are things that are not contracts, but at the same time they give rise to certain obligations, right? So if you are deciding a question on quasi contracts, it's important for you to say that I understand that the idea behind quasi contracts is to prevent unjust enrichment, to ensure that somebody who is does not have a formal contract for whatever reason should not just be given a raw deal or should not be turned out and not paid for the services that person has rendered, right? So you need to have that principle in mind. For example, if you are dealing with a question of impossibility under the contract law, you need to know what is the law of frustration. You need to know where the concept comes from. So if you're reading res judicata, for example, you need to know what is the essence of that law. The essence of that law is that you cannot be allowed to agitate the same thing over and over again. It is in the interest of the state that there should be an end to litigation. If you fought a case once, you cannot keep fighting it over and over again and keep beating the dead horse. So if you stick to the intent, if you stick to the essence, then you are really understanding the law, and you're in a position to apply the law in a variety of circumstances which an exam like Delhi or Haryana would possibly expect you to. Many people also ask me this question: Is coaching something that is necessary? The answer to that would be, and in the interest of complete disclosure, I've been somebody who's been a beneficiary of coaching myself. I coached with Rahul sir of Rahul's IAS. But to answer your question, are there people who clear the exam without coaching? The answer is yes. There are people who clear it without coaching. So by no means is it an absolute precondition, but it does help you in certain areas in getting conceptual clarity a little quicker than trying to read on your own. And for example, if you're attending regular classes every day for a number of hours, that also gives you the discipline of study, which you may not be able to do on your own. So there are certain upsides to it, but the short answer would be it is not an absolute precondition, and you will have to find out what works for you. If you can, study with discipline. And the next question that may come up is, how many hours do you study? That again is a because there's a huge misconception that you need to study for 16 hours a day in order to make up, or in order to make the cut for the exam. Again, it is something that depends on your ability to grasp how many how much mentally invested you are into the process. For example, the test sometimes is qualitative and not quantitative. It depends on how much study that you put into your hours and not the hours that you put into your study, right? So for some people, 4 hours may be sufficient. But as a matter of experience, if you ask me, I would say that at least 8 hours or 9 hours of constant engagement with your books is something that's important, because let's be honest, it's a very, very competitive exam. I mean, for every 10,000 people that possibly apply for the exam, 20 people get selected. I'm not trying to intimidate you or trying to tell you that this is extremely tough, but it is tough. So when you are preparing for an exam like that, you really need to be on the top of your game. And 8 hours, at least to my understanding, is important. And then broadly on preparation and books, for example, if you do not join coaching, what do? There are standard textbooks on every subject which are very, very good. For example, on the Code of Civil Procedure, you have Takwani, which is an excellent book. You have Avtar Singh on contract, which is excellent. You have Bangia, for example, on torts, which is a very basic textbook, but still it does the job. You have D.D. Basu or Bakshi for constitution. So those standard textbooks. And along with that, what you really need is a great command on the Bare Act, because everything boils down to the Bare Act at the end of the day. Those 2 lines, 3 lines are what you will be interpreting in the court. You need to really find out the key words in that provision. Just to give you an example, for example, there's an article in the Constitution that says that a Supreme Court judge would be appointed by the President in consultation with the Chief Justice.
Right.
Now, in a number of cases, the interpretation of the word consultation has come into question. What do you mean by consultation? Who has the final word? Is it the Chief Justice or is it the President? So the court in a number of cases has effectively interpreted the word consult as concurrence. So they have interpreted a word to mean exactly the opposite. Consultation is only making a suggestion and the President is free to disregard it. But under our constitutional scheme for the longest time, consultation meant concurrence. Without the Chief Justice's say so, the President could not appoint a judge. And the Chief Justice, of course, would deal with the issue with the collegium, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is when you're reading that particular article in the Constitution, you have to focus on the word consult, and you need to know how different cases have interpreted the word consult differently. So that's very, very important, and focus on those areas. And how to make notes is something that I can see on the screen. Thank you for the question. Interesting question. Again, it's something that is dependent on how you want to do it. The core is you need to understand it really well. Okay, whenever you've read a concept, you should be in a position where somebody wakes you up at like 3 o'clock in the night and asks you to explain it. You should be in a position to do it. That's how you should have read it. That's how you should have internalized it. And you internalize by reading it again and again. When you read a provision a number of times, when you think about it a number of times, when you visualize it in your mind a number of times, when you look at the illustrations to a section, and then you try to close your eyes and have them play out in your mind, and sort of create a story around it, that's how you internalize it. So very important for you to do it. When you've done it, then how you make notes becomes a secondary sort of a question. But yes, your notes should contain what is the essence of that section, what are the major case laws, how the courts have interpreted it. All of that should be there in your notes. And visualization and internalization, I would tell you again, is the key. Because I see a lot of people, they read a lot, they put in a lot of time, but they don't think about it as often. We do this in court also. That is what I keep telling people who practice with me, that when you've read a brief, you should also think about the brief. If you've read the brief for like 1 hour, spend at least 30 minutes thinking about it with your eyes closed. That's how it becomes a part of you. And that's how preparation should be. Yeah. Any other questions?
I can see a lot of messages saying that my voice is not. You guys hear me, or am I not audible?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So there are a lot of big questions as well, but we answer them towards the end of the session. I'll just move on to our next segment, which is you moving from from the bench go to and back to the bar. So what was it that made you decide to leave just after 4 years and then come back to the bar and join? Well, you're a partner at Sutra, which is a big law firm now. So what made you make that shift?
So I told you, I've always been very passionate about advocacy. I mean, I used to fight my own case with my dad when I was young, or fight against the principal, and not giving any ideas to the younger people who are watching. But I've always been passionate about it, about persuasion as an exercise, about convincing somebody to agree with my story. I've loved writing, I've loved debating, I love traveling. So I've always identified as a lawyer somewhere deep within. At the very outset, I loved being a judge. I tried doing justice to it as long as I was there. It's a fantastic opportunity to do justice and to make a great difference to people's lives. But at some point, I realized that this is not who I am really. I enjoy doing it. I think I'm good at it because I'm passionate about law. But at the end of the day, what gives you the kick is the question, right? What gives me the kick, or what gives me that adrenaline around, throughout my body is arguing a difficult case, for example, or cross-examining a very, very difficult witness. We as judges at the academy are taught not to believe in lawyers and start with skepticism, a healthy skepticism, right? A good judge would never take a lawyer's word for, at its face value. And especially the glib ones, they would take you with a pinch of salt or a bucket of salt, right? So as a judge, you're taught not to believe in a lawyer. As a lawyer, your task is so challenging. Your task is to make somebody believe in you who's taught not to believe in you, right? So I like the challenge of that thing, somebody put it very beautifully, and I like to borrow that some people like to balance the scales and some people like to tip the scales. Maybe I belong to the latter category, where I find tipping the scales more challenging, convincing somebody more challenging. And I realized that for me, given my skill set, practice of law would give me a wider canvas to play with. For example, I love to, travel. I love to work on matters from different areas of law. So today my practice is arbitration, white collar crime defense, tech, commercial disputes. It's very colorful sort of a canvas. So I like to do different things, and being a litigator, especially in these times, allows you to do a number of different things. You can express yourself publicly, without having to think twice. Judging, as awesome as it is, requires the judge to, maintain some sort of reticence to not express himself or herself publicly, especially on policy issue or social issues. Because as a judge, you can't give your mind away. But I've always enjoyed doing that. I love to write columns. I love to, teach. I love to travel and do all of that. And at some point, I realized that being a lawyer would allow me to do all of that, and I'll be able to use my skill set better and I'll be more satisfied more than anything else. But at the same time, I would end by saying that you cannot really compare judgeship and lawyering. These are very, very different things. They're not even on the same plane. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. It depends on what you want out of life. Both are very, very important stakeholders. I find more fulfillment in being a lawyer, and it makes me happier.
Yeah. That's also, I understand.
Janvi, we keep losing you.
Sorry. Oh,
Let's try again. Yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, no, as the gist that social media that up out there, so for you to refrain from doing that is like going against your own nature. Yeah. So I understand that.
I missed that, Janvi. I'm sorry. Repeat it.
I'm saying for you to not write and not spend your thoughts will be against your inherent nature. It's not. You can see this later when it's recorded. It's fine.
Okay, no problem. Let me try to read what Harshika says.
Yes.
Harshika says, how do we decide to go to which field after completing law? Because the people who do not have legal background, it becomes difficult for them to decide that. Great question, Harshika. Thank you very much. That's at what point do you decide that this is the area of law that I want to work in, or I want to be a judge, or I want to be a lawyer? I would say that you defer the decision if you are in law school till at least the final year or the fourth year. Don't try to decide too early. Of course, there would be a lot of people who would tell you that specialization is the key, and there is no room for a generalist advocate anymore. If you want to be a tax lawyer, you have to go in tax very, very quickly. If you want to be a judge, you start reading in second year. I personally wouldn't advise that. You really need to experience a lot of fields before making an informed decision on what you really want to do. Because if you don't experience it, you do not know what lies, on the other side. So try to do as many diverse internships as you can in your law school so that you get a flavor of everything. Go try and intern with a district judge, close to your house. Go intern in a firm or with a litigator or an organization and then decide. The question about not having a legal background is a very valid concern, because there's a huge perception, and this perception is not untrue. As all cliches, this also has some truth in it, that the profession is sometimes anti-meritarian or is a very hereditary sort of a profession where you can do well if you have somebody in your family who's a lawyer. Now, I would urge you not to be disheartened by any of that. Many of our lawyers who are doing extraordinarily well, and judges, are first generation lawyers and judges. And don't think that if you don't have a background, you would not be able to compete in that sense. The idea is to, after, and I'll tell you, some people think that it's very easy if you have somebody in your family who's a lawyer or a judge. There are benefits, of course. You get exposed to law at a very young age. That's the benefit. But at the same time, it does not see you through. If you do not have it in you of what this profession takes, somebody is going to trust you once with their case as a lawyer because your father is X or Y or your mother is X or Y. But that client is never going to come back to you if you don't perform in the court. So having somebody who's a lawyer in your family only leads to a rebuttable presumption that you know what you're doing, but that rebuttable presumption would take only minutes to get destroyed in the court. We love to say that a lawyer is as good as the last performance in the court. So you may have somebody who's a legend in your family who's a lawyer, but you may turn out to be, an absolute failure at what you do. And, there are examples of that as well. So do not think that you do not have a background, you are incapacitated in any way. Write as much as you can. Try to develop a flair of writing. I think Janvi and me would come to this a little later on legal writing. But legal writing, just to tell you in short, helps you be noticed. It creates a level playing field. As a recruiter, when I sit to recruit lawyers, or otherwise on any of the other committees, I do not look at somebody's lineage. I look at the candidate. I look at what the candidate has done, whether that person is articulate, analytical, how well read that person is, and wherever that person comes from has got nothing to do with how, at least I decide or a majority of people decide. So yeah, take heart in that. Janvi, do you think we should move on or take some more questions?
There is Akhil Vastav. He's asked lawyer input after graduation. So to this advocate record exam, all can hear me, and that happens after 5 years of practice. 4 years of your regular practice, and then 1 year for the exam. So once you start, it's probably not a good idea to go to Supreme Court directly. But after 4 years, if you want to practice in Supreme Court exclusively, you can give the. What does it mean to be an expert is white collar crime?
Oh, okay. So white collar crime is an area that I love working on. For the viewers, for people who do not really know what it entails or who are new to this, I personally in law school, by the way, did not know really what white collar crime practice is. To us, criminal law has always been about winning that very, very famous murder case or a kidnapping case or a terrorism related offense, some violent, crime, and that you help defend and solve, and then, you make a witness breakdown on the stand with all the drama and rhetoric that comes with it. But as I started, I always had a fascination for criminal law. It is what
Can
really.
I just pause you for a second? I want to. People are saying they can't hear me, so tell me what is fine. Okay, when can you hear me? I'm just shifting my phone. Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Continue.
So no problem. Criminal law is something I was always interested in. Criminal law is something I wanted to do, and as I started studying more, I realized that there is more to criminal law than your murder cases, your accident cases, your negligence cases, right? I came across other more complex criminal cases, which are socio-economic offenses. I personally don't like the term white collar crime a lot, because sometimes I think it gives you understand, a sort of respectability to an offense which may not be warranted. But since it is a term that is used, we use that. So white collar crime basically is an offense that is traditionally perceived to be committed by people holding high positions in companies and government departments, ministers, CEOs of companies, MDs and CEOs, people who were traditionally known as white collar workers. So any offense committed by them is known as a white collar crime. Usually these crimes are not violent in nature. These crimes essentially involve offenses, which involve money, cheating, fraud, insider trading, securities fraud, forgery, criminal breach of trust. Some of these are offenses which are white collar crime offenses. Money laundering under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act is also a white collar crime offense. Why do I love doing it? I love doing it because it's challenging. I love doing it because it's complex. Whenever you are working on a very challenging or a complex case, you really get to work with the best minds that are out there in terms of your client, in terms of the senior counsels. Many of these cases also have a cross-border implication, so you get to work a lot with the foreign lawyers, and the best minds sort of get to work together. Also, a reason for working on this is because most of these crimes are done by extremely sophisticated people. These are not crimes done on an impulse or on a provocation. These are very, very well planned, meticulously and sophisticatedly planned offenses. And it takes a lot to uncover them. It takes a lot to decipher them. And then, of course, there is a lot of public perception, that is built up around these offenses. We've all seen 2G, coal scam, and IL and FS, all of these cases have really captured the nation's imagination. So these crimes do have a very important dimension for the nation as a whole. So they are important that way, and they are challenging. So that's why I like to work on them. And a lot of opportunities in the practice of white collar crime. I personally work more on the side as a defense lawyer, but sometimes we also get to assist the prosecution, the enforcement directorate, the CBI, the Serious Fraud Investigation Office. We get to assist them on important issues. Another interesting area related to white collar crime is the area of internal investigations, which not a lot of people are aware of. An internal investigation is an investigation that a company or a government department does internally when they find out that a fraud or any irregularity has taken place. For instance, a company gets to know that the managing director has given loans to his related parties from the company's account. Then the company's board of directors can order an independent law firm and forensic experts to do an internal investigation to really find out what has really happened. And we as lawyers help them investigate the offense and find out who are the culprits, and then suggest to the management and the board of directors that these are the ways in which you can remedy this. This is the action you take against the wrongdoers, and then help them through with the process. So there are various areas of white collar crime. It's going to be a huge practice area for the simple reason that last few decades have seen a lot of socioeconomic, crime on the rise. Every time there is a financial crisis, there is always a huge rise in socioeconomic offenses because of desperation, because of people falling on tough circumstances. The US recession and the depression gave rise to a huge rise in socioeconomic offenses. And so it's going to be a very important practice area in the future, and interesting to work at. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for that. You can hear.
In bits and pieces, yes.
Oh, okay. So my next question is, you indicate how you like. So you can.
No.
Bharat, hi.
Hi, welcome back.
So you've indicated how you can, how you are interested in writing, and it's your passion, and so is teaching. So what would you like to tell us about judgment writing and legal writing?
Sure. I've said a lot on judgment writing and legal writing. Uh, I mean, shamelessly plugging in my own blog. Please visit it if you want to look at specific.
Tell us the name of your blog. What's the name of your blog?
Oh, in typical narcissistic fashion, I've named it after myself. So it's bharatchuk.in. Thank you very much. So do visit that. But yeah, I mean, just to answer your question, I'm really passionate about talking about judgment writing, because as a judge, I've always wanted to write better myself and to make sure that my judgments are clearer. And I've had the opportunity of training a lot of aspiring and judges at the academy in judgment writing. Why should you look at judgment writing and try to make it better? It's for the simple reason that you are writing for the layman. You are writing for somebody who is not trained in law. So it is incumbent on you as judges, as aspiring judges, to make it as simple, as clear as you can. A judgment is not, literature. It's not something that you do in order to satisfy your pangs of literature, right? It's an exercise in communication. It's an exercise where you decide a dispute between two parties, and you should demonstrate how you decide it. Your reasoning should be very clear. As we say, justice should not only be done, it should be seen to be done. So your reasoning should be clear. And most of all, why is it important for you to write clearly is that ignorance of law is no excuse. Okay? Nobody can say, I didn't know the law. And judgments are law. They constitute law. So in these circumstances, it is very important for you to make your judgments speak to the common man. Your judgments speak to the layman, because he's going to be bound by your judgment either way, even if he doesn't understand it. And if he does not understand it, it's a very cruel sort of a catch-22 for him, where he's bound by something that he can't really understand. I think, the problems with the legal writing or judgment writing and the way they are being written these days is mostly because of your control V and your copy pastes of the world, and Google researches where you just lift a huge para from an earlier decision into your decision. That's the problem we are seeing, and this is where I get on to a rant. We see judgments written on gender justice where 160 paras are dedicated on the Vedas and the Bible and other documents telling you why should you respect women. Now, for God's sake, I don't want the scriptures to tell me that I should respect women. I can respect women even without having to go thousands of years back. The problem is this, that for 150 paras, the entire history of gender justice would be traced, and then the nub of the issue in the case would come up for discussion. That puts a lot of people off. That makes the judgment inaccessible, unreadable for a majority of the people, the laymen, the law students, the young lawyers. So that is my problem with judgment writing, and that is what motivated me to start writing about it. If you are a judge, or if you are somebody who wants to be a judge, please understand the best formula is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Write as straight as you can. Never write anything that you can't speak out to a non-legal friend. So whenever I've written a line, whether it's in a judgment or in an article, if I'm not in a position to say it out aloud to a non-legal friend, then I'm not going to write it. Write it only if you can speak it. That would allow you to steer clear of a lot of unnecessary verbiage in your judgment, to keep it simple. Use more active voice than passive voice. Never try to right click a word and try to find out a fancier synonym. That is what we call as a judgment by thesaurus. Don't try to write a judgment by thesaurus. It's not cool. Always try to write simply. And the whole point of us writing is to demystify something. Demystify it either for the reader or for a younger lawyer, or to the court. In fact, I mean, court doesn't have time to read a lot of things when you're beating about the bush. The judge doesn't have the luxury of time. You have to get to the point straight away. And this is how we like to prepare our cases with my younger colleagues. What we try to do is, we prepared a case, we try to make an elevator pitch out of it. So we try to do it in 30 seconds, because that's pretty much what you get if you're doing it in the Supreme Court on a miscellaneous day. So if you can't summarize your case, or at least the primary bone of contention, in 30 seconds, you haven't prepared well enough. So we like to work on those principles when we are doing a briefing note, preparing, or legal writing. So that's important to me when I am writing. There are a couple of very, very good works on legal writing. Brian on legal writing is an excellent book that I can recommend to the audience. There is an excellent book called Point Taken: How to Write Like the Nation's Best Lawyers. This is written in the American context, but a very, very good book on writing better. I'm not getting into the question of drafting of pleadings, because that is a totally separate area altogether. I'm going to stick to general legal writing, which is your columns, your articles, and judgment writing. What is also very important before writing is to read a lot. You cannot be a great writer until you're a great reader. You have to read a lot in order to get the vocabulary, get how ideas are communicated, and that's important. Giving out the essence of your case or the argument that you are making in the very first few paragraphs is also very, very important. Especially these days when everyone is living in an information glut. There's so much information out there, and every piece of information is fighting for the reader's attention. If you don't get the reader's attention in the first few paragraphs, you've lost him. So if you're writing an article where your real issue comes up in the third para or the fourth para, you've already lost the reader. And if you are doing it with the judge, if your main argument comes up 5 minutes later, he's not going to, pay attention to what you're doing. Also, try to stay clear of ornamentalization and difficult words. For example, something like inter alia. Inter alia can easily be replaced with amongst other things or among other things, right? Why do you write totality of circumstances? Write all the circumstances. Subsequent to, write after. And some people, have this huge love for writing, forgetting this phrase, it goes without saying, or needless to state. Now, if it goes without saying, then it should actually go without saying, right? Don't say it then. Argue
I'm
and
I'm guilty of
you are guilty of that as well, and so am I. But we just need to keep reminding ourselves to, write more simply and write better. Uh, so yeah, these would be some of the points. Be very, very clear of your pronunciation. For example, I love to give this example in some of my writings. Roko mat jane do is a phrase, right? You say roko, comma, mat jane do. So both of them are very, very different depending on where you place the comma. Another example is let's eat grandma. Let's eat, comma, grandma.
yeah.
So just by placing the comma right, you can save lives literally here. So important for you to keep that in mind. Uh, Very, very important for you to, not quote a lot of case law in whatever you are writing, unless it is very, very important. Please understand a case law and a precedent, understand it and explain it in your own words. And finally, if you, are writing, please remember less is more. Be you can write a lot in a lesser amount of words. Try to do that. Another example on this that I love to talk about, Hemingway is one of my favorite writers. He wrote a short story in 6 words, and these 6 words were baby shoes, for sale, never worn. So in a matter of 6 words, he could convey so much. A baby shoes for sale, never worn, is a very, very tragic and complicated story about a woman who was expecting a kid and who unfortunately had a miscarriage. And then she had to look at the things that she had bought for the kid in anticipation of the kid being born, right? And in 6 words, look at, all that he could say and make you feel. So less is more, and, just look at all these things.
If you can hear me now.
I can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and also, I mean, 6 words you can interpret these 6 words in so many ways. Like it could have been a lady who had a child, but then for some reason was separated from that child, or I mean, it could be anything really. So actually,
You
this
make a
brings
great
me to
point. I'm sorry, you make a great point. So when you say 6 words can be interpreted in various ways, you have to be very, very sure when you are using lesser words in your article or your judgment that those words should not be open to interpretation, because the whole point of an article or judgment is to communicate and put the point across.
yes.
If it is like poetry, if it is too abstract, if it is being capable of being read in different ways by different people, if it is too subjective, then that would not do the job here. Because what you are doing is not really creative writing. What you are doing is you are getting the point across. It's an analytical point, it's an analytical piece.
Yes, and then you open yourself up to like a lot of appeals and a lot of people challenging the order, which is, I mean, you don't want to do that. Okay, so this brings me to my next question. What is your favorite book and why is it your favorite book? Did you hear that?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay.
What's my favorite book? Uh, I have a lot of favorites actually. Uh, uh, I mean, I read fiction. So if you ask me about fiction, Albert Camus' The Stranger is a favorite of mine. It's a very interesting book about a young guy who unfortunately loses his mother, and
Oh.
so Janvi's sort of okay, you're back. So this gentleman in the book, the protagonist, is somebody who has his own way of dealing with grief. So he does not cry at his mom's funeral. Okay, he's sad on the inside. It's just that he cannot express it. So later, the funeral is done. Some years later, the same man is prosecuted for the murder of a guy. Now, when he's prosecuted for the murder of somebody else, the evidence that is led, by the prosecution against him is that so many months earlier or so many years earlier, this gentleman did not cry at his mom's funeral. So he's clearly a misanthrope. He's somebody who does not feel, who does not have emotions, who's a cold, brutal killer. And that is led as a piece of evidence. And as a matter of fact, in the book, and I'm not going to give spoilers, this is taken by the judge as valid evidence. So it is very interesting, to see how a French, court system plays out, and the story of this young man. It's an interesting book. I would strongly recommend that. On the non-fiction side of things, I really love Harari, who writes brilliant non-fiction. His book *Sapiens*, about the history of civilization and how we came to be who we are is very, very interesting. His book Homo Deus, which is about how human beings are going to be in the future, how we are going to collaborate with technology and AI and data and sort of become superhumans or transhumans. And his book, another latest book that has come out is the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is another very, very good book, because what this guy really does is, and which is the key point of all of his books, is he puts together his understanding of history and social sciences and humanities and science together in order to help us see the world better. So he's one of the best interpreters of the world for me. So yeah, these are some of my favorite books. Love to read, and I cannot emphasize this enough, that readers are leaders. Very important for the young viewers watching to read. I can say that from experience. If you look at and you must be reading a lot of biographies of legal legends and stalwarts in the profession. There is one commonality that you would find in all of their lives, is that they are all very, very avid readers. The ability to read gives you the ability to empathize, gives you the ability to relate to a different life, other than yours, and it gives you the ability to walk into somebody else's shoes and see the world through their eyes. And if you look at it, the whole profession is based on that. Your ability to see the world as your client does, in order to defend him properly. Your ability to see what the judge is seeing right now. That is how you convince him, right? Your and his mind should be aligned. Your moral compasses should be aligned. And if you are not aligned, you are not going to succeed for your client. Books give you the ability to be somebody else for a moment. Apart from the leisure qualities of books, we read for leisure, we read to escape the banalities of our own life. But reading is also important because it helps you express yourself better. It helps you, understand and interpret life better. It helps you to understand from the mistakes from others, and you can look at that. So really recommend that. Janvi, you are a reader
Yes.
yourself. Why don't you
Yes.
share what you are reading or any of your favorite books?
Well, currently I'm reading two books and I'm reading both of them again, like for the second time, because I thought, I have this time during quarantine, so I should revisit my favorite books. The first one is by Joe Lassett. It's called Buttered Parsnips, How to Win at Modern Life, One Email at a Time. So it's a funny book, and Joe Lassett is a classic comedian. He's very famous in the UK. And it's really funny, guys. If you can get your hands on this book, please read it. You will be in fits of laughter. The second book that I'm reading, of course, is by Trevor Noah. We all know him as the Daily Show host in the US. But before that, he was a stand-up comedian, and he's struggled through life, and he lived at a time when apartheid was the norm in South Africa. So he was literally born a crime. So the book is called Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. So it's all about his life and that journey, but also it's really funny because he's inherently a comedian. So if any of you have that book or have access to the Kindle version of that book, please read it. It's amazing. You will not regret it.
I completely agree. Janvi, do you think we should take some questions now?
Yeah,
Uh,
we have about 3-4 minutes. So do you want to take questions or do you want to recite your poem?
I want to read questions.
Why? You need to recite your
No, no.
poems. Guys, you should ask him to recite his poems.
Okay, we can do that, but let's take up some questions. I mean,
Yes.
I'll feel bad otherwise.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Kajal has asked us, and I'm not trying to run away from the poetry, by the way.
Okay.
I mean, I'll do it at an appropriate stage, but first, some questions. Kajal says compulsory to remember each and every section. Kajal, not really. As I said, you need to, I mean, you can't forget that res judicata is section 11 CPC, right? You cannot forget 115 of the Evidence Act is estoppel. You cannot forget that section 9 of the CPC gives every civil court jurisdiction over civil matters. So the important sections, of course, you will have to remember. But for the other sections, if you remember the substance, then that should be enough. I mean, for example, there are 511 sections in IPC. Nobody expects you to know all of them. But you can't forget murder or culpable homicide, right? That's important. So just make that distinction when you're studying. Thank you, Sukriti, Astha. Thank you very much. Okay, Sakshi, what kind of competitions do you think are best for students? I'm not sure what is the import of the question. If you can just clarify this, happy to answer it. Uh, Kajal, share your strategy for clearing the judiciary exam. A strategy was, really to be good at my law and to understand it really, really well, to become the problem solver as far as law is concerned for most of my friends, my clients, and, be in a position where I can actually teach somebody that law and to be proficient on such a level. That was the strategy. And once you are good at it, then you'll find your place somewhere or the other. Even for example, if you don't clear the judicial services exam, you'll be an excellent lawyer if you're good at your law. I've seen so many people who worked and struggled at the exam for a number of years, but unfortunately could not clear the exam. Now are doing exceedingly well at the bar. Why? Because they spent those 2-3 years really reading their law, investing in themselves, and so that never goes to waste, even if you don't make it. I personally, when I look back, the time of preparation was the best time of my life, I think. Because today, when I'm arguing a case in the court, or I'm advising a client, or in an arbitration, I always go back to 2010 and 11 when I was preparing. And, the picture of the Bayer Act and the section and my notes, it sort of flashes in front of me like a 3D, diagram. And I really, I'm glad that I spent that time. In that time, I had a lot of anxieties, and I'm sure a lot of the aspirants watching would be torn with anxieties all the time that we are spending so much time.
Have
Yeah.
to cut you off at this time because we need to save this video.
Okay.
So we'll have to end the session. We can start a second session. Guys, you can put your questions in the second session. We'll do purely question answer session over there. Okay, we'll be back in like 4 minutes.
All right.
Okay, you send me a request again once I go live.
I'll do that.
Okay,
See you on
thank
the
you.
other side.
Yes.